life. Sorry, everybody, I just swore. Hello, welcome to the 5th panel at the South Coast Lesfic Hangout. I do apologise for that. I didn't know we were live already. Welcome. This is very exciting. I am Natalie Miller-Snell. I am Seize the Day podcast host, and I am also a personal and business coach, where I help folk achieve their goals. But today I am here alongside lovely Claire and Amanda, who have organised this incredible virtual experience this weekend. It's been fantastic. Like I say, this is panel 5. This morning we had Amanda on talking about writing during COVID and trying to be creative. So if you missed that, it's still in the Facebook group. But to let you know, we're 20 seconds ahead. I will try to check all of the messages as they come through and put them to these gorgeous individuals that are on the panel now. So we have with us, without further ado, let's just get straight into it. We have Claire Highton-Stevenson, Arizona Tape. We've got Emma Sterner-Radley, and we've got Brey Willows. Gorgeous individuals. So let's hand over to you. If you'd like to give us a little bit of an intro about yourselves, and then we'll crack on talking about today's panel, mixing genres. I'm so excited. Okay, Claire, come on. Yeah. You haven't been on these yet. This is your gig.
I know. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I've just been sitting watching everybody else have fun. So I've been writing for about 3 years, and I've just released my 13th book. So I am just plodding along and trying to just get on with being a writer and seeing how we go.
Love it.
Part of the fun.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Arizona?
Hi, yeah, I've been writing for a couple of years as well, and as the panel suggests, in lots of different genres and lots of different things, because I like lots of different things.
I love that. Different is good, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And Emma,
Sure.
over to you.
Well, I write fantasy under Emma Sterner-Radley, and I wrote romance as Emma Radley, but I've now focused on fantasy only. I have no idea how long I've been writing. It's like 4 or 5 years, but time is a weird concept for me, so I have no idea.
The vacuum of time has just got a little bit odd this year. It's got to be said.
Especially with COVID,
Yeah, it's really very strange. There's no linearity to it at all, I certainly feel, at least anyway. Perhaps this is good if we're going to talk about fantasy. And last but not least, Brey Williams. Willows, sorry, not Williams, crikey. Second day, what am I like? Please, over to you, a little bit about yourself.
I have been writing for about probably 4 years, but I published quite a few short stories before that in various genres, a lot of erotica, and I've been an editor for almost 15 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Lovely, fantastic collection of wonderful individuals for this panel. So let's kick off and understand from each of you, what is your favourite go-to genre? Now, it'd be good to know what do you like to write in terms of your favourite genre, but then also to read as well. And if there's a difference, what the difference is and why. So let's start with Claire.
Well, to read, I will always pick up a murder mystery. That's my favourite. I like to try and guess who's done it, and I'm probably the worst person to go and watch a whodunit film with, because I'll just be going, they did it. So yeah, that's my favourite to read. But to write, I don't know, it's kind of a 50-50. I thought I was a romance writer, and then I started writing murder mystery, and I kind of like that too, but because they're completely different. So I don't know, maybe a 50-50 on that for me.
Okay, we've got a comment coming in. Love Emma's t-shirt. So let's hand it over to you, Emma. It's a great t-shirt, actually. Go on. What is your favourite? What is your go-to genre to read and to write?
Well, to read, I'm a bit of an omnivore. I'll read most things, but I like fantasy books, historical novels, non-fiction, sci-fi, crime, most things. To write, I prefer to write fantasy. Because you get to create whole worlds, and you don't have to stick to just this world. You can just be a complete dreamer. So that works really well for me.
We'll come on to that actually, because one of my thoughts is how you get into that process, particularly when you're doing fantasy. I mean, I suppose the world is literally your oyster. Yeah. Arizona, the same question to you.
To read, I'd probably like some romance, something that's really fun and kind of takes me away from whatever is going on. To write, probably say whatever I'm not writing at the moment. So if I'm writing some romance, I'll be like, oh, I love fantasy so much more. And then when I'm writing some fantasy, I'm like, oh, I miss the romance. What am I doing? And it just kind of keeps going on like that.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Oh, yeah, always the grass is greener.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, brilliant.
And then I get there and it's like, what am I doing? No, and then I get kind of stuck between writing everything.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And the same to you, Brey.
A bit like Emma, I'm an omnivore. I love kind of reading everything. Depends on the mood I'm in. I like a lot of literary fiction as well, kind of Toni Morrison and Neil Gaiman and Margaret Atwood type stuff, which I suppose still falls into the fantasy realm, quite a lot of it. And then as far as what I write, fantasy, urban fantasy is probably my chosen if I'm gonna start creating. But I like being able to just sit down and think, what if, and see where that takes me.
I like that. Well, so yeah, I suppose that question, maybe we'll extend it with you then, Brey. What is the draw to writing different? Is it that freedom to literally explore whatever it is you want to in terms of writing and being super creative?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think you've nailed it. It's about just what if this happened, and what if that happened, and what if somebody showed up at my door tomorrow and said, you have to come with me right now, the world depends on it, you know. And then seeing where that takes you.
And to extend on that, and I'll ask you all this as well, how do you get your inspiration in that regard?
It depends. For me, it's that what if question is where I usually start. Some things come to me in dreams. So Changing Course is my first sci-fi, and that came to me in a dream. And Chosen, which was my dystopian kind of end of the world novel, also came to me in a dream. So those are good. And then weird random things. I love random facts that can take you in weird directions. Like Spinning Tales, I came across a condo for sale, a little cottage that was for sale on top of a New York apartment building. Like, who builds a cottage on top of an apartment building? And from there, it was just, let's see where it goes.
That's gorgeous. I absolutely love that. Same question, a two-parter to Arizona as well.
What was the first part again?
The first part. So yeah, what's the draw to being different, you know, in terms of actually writing? And then beyond that, where do you get your creativity? Yeah.
Well, the draw for me, I think, is that I like a little bit the same, like what if I just have a very vivid imagination and anything can just kind of spark. And because there's so many different influences around me, I get drawn to different things and then just want to do them. And sometimes romance, like just a contemporary romance, lends itself better for that. And sometimes it's a bit easier to go for a fantasy route depending on what I want to focus on. And then inspiration wise, I would say that I like the idea of being someone different, or like understanding someone differently, like you said, like who would do this? And I guess sometimes watching movies or listening to music or reading other stories, you kind of go like, this person is just fascinating to me. Like, how do they get there? What makes them tick? And then writing all these different kind of settings and stories, I can really explore what different people would do and not necessarily what I would do every time, because I mean, I'm me and that's always the same. But when I'm writing different books, I get to be all these different people. So yeah.
I love that. There's a complete freedom in terms of how you approach it, and literally allowing yourself, I suppose actors feel that as well when they go into different roles a bit. You can be a different person. Yeah,
and I think it's a very fun way, and often I will, like, if I'm doing something, say with magic or something in my books, then I will kind of start researching that and maybe doing a little bit of magic myself to kind of get in the flow, and it's just a good way to get new experiences for myself as well, or learn about new things.
Love that. Over to you, Claire.
Well, to be fair, when I started writing, I didn't really understand that there was such things as genres and things. I just thought, I'm going to just write this story and that's it. And then I wrote the next story and I wrote the next story, and they didn't really think about it. And it's only when I started to kind of publish them that you started to realize, oh, actually this is romance, or this is that, or, you know, whatever it was. So I didn't set out with anything to sort of guide me on that sense. I just wrote what I wanted to write, and I just found that was that's the easiest way for me to do it. I just get an idea, so something pops in my head. Mainly I used to be driving around quite a lot with nothing much more to do than sort of imagine stuff. And because in my old job I would be driving for like 12-14 hours a day on my own. So you just kind of, there's a lot of stuff that can go on in your head in 14 hours. I have entire stories mapped out, and you know, characters sitting in the car next to me having a chat. It was that kind of thing. So yeah, so I would just start writing things down, and that was how they kind of come about. And then switching over to something totally different was just really as a just to see if I could do it. Really,
I love that. That is I really like that, particularly being in the car talking to strangers or yourself. As the
imaginary strangers. Yeah.
Getting pulled over. What's going on in there? And same to you, Emma.
Well, I guess I kind of found, like writing contemporary novels, I found that kind of constrained, because I wanted something out of the ordinary to happen. And then be like, oh, well, that's not really realistic. But if you write in a lot of the other genres, something strange can happen. And you can bend and break things, and you can change things, and, you know, change languages and places they're in and stuff like that. So I think it just kind of gave me more scope to kind of go with my imagination. So I sort of took the romances I was writing in our world and just put them in more fun worlds or more scary worlds, or whatever I felt like writing at the time. I think when it comes to where to find the creativity, I think I just, you know, you get that from everywhere, from everything you take in, be that TV or a book or a person you see walking on the street. Anything can kind of spark that kind of, maybe this could be something to write about.
How many of you have actually got lots of close friends and families in your book and you don't tell them? Other faces say, oh, brilliant. Yeah, no comment. Okay, excellent. We've got some questions coming in from the watchers. Do you ever think of amalgamating genres within one book, or does that dilute the experience? Forgive me, I'm literally drowning in sweat in my room. It's so hot.
It's all right, it's hot here as well.
Oh, is it? Over to you, Emma.
Well, because I write romance and fantasy, as I say, I've just put my romance in my fantasy. So I have actually amalgamated the two. Especially because I write a lot of YA fantasy, which is a little bit less world building and epic wars, and a little bit more romance and character development and kind of seeing a person's life changing. Okay. So I sort of just like did amalgamate them, I suppose.
Okay, over to you, Brey.
Yeah, I think with the romance thing in particular, all of my books have a romance in them, although it's not the focus usually. So I think I try to strike a balance between those two, between a romance genre and a fantasy or sci-fi kind of thing. But I don't think I would mix too much, because I think, like you said, it might dilute it slightly and make it a little bit harder to market potentially, I think, because people who like sci-fi might not like mystery kind of thing. So I don't know. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah. You, Arizona?
Yeah, I'd say that I quite do a lot of mashups as well, especially like with romance and some fantasy. Like but I think, like as mentioned before, urban fantasy just in itself is a really good mix of contemporary and fantasy in itself as well. And you can have characters being upset about really mundane things like, oh, the neighbor is annoying, and then in the next chapter, oh, this crazy vampire is trying to eat me, and it kind of just all works together. So I think there is a lot of people that relate to both and like both in the same book. So I think it's definitely something that people like, and I like it too.
Brilliant. And you, Claire?
Yeah, definitely. I think because I predominantly do write romance, I was very aware that that's what my readership was. So when I first did the Witten series, I really wasn't sure whether or not they would grab onto that. And so I did kind of slide a romance into it then. But actually I'm glad I did, because I think it made it a bit I think it made it more interesting, and it made the character a little bit more rounded and a little bit more,
Okay.
she's flawed and she's not quite perfect. But in that sense, some of the romance readers don't quite like that either. So it's kind of a difficult balance. But yeah, I think anything I write will always have a romance streaking along there somewhere in it.
So on that, and there's a couple of questions coming in which I'll pick up on just now. In terms of the writing different, love it. When I read books, I adore reading something different. I think it allows your mind to expand and it goes in different places, and it's lovely to experience inclusivity, diversity, and everything within a book. In that, do you find that with romance, how do you term the book if it's got romance in it, particularly with a HEA, because that is the definition for romance, if I'm understanding correctly? How do you then define your book? Over to Arizona.
That's a good question. I think the happy ever after, I love happy ever afters, but I think they don't always look the same to everyone. So I think a lot of my friends have gone like, oh, I've written this book and look what a beautiful happy after, and then this is like, no, this is not a happy ever after, what have you done? and I think that kind of sometimes makes it for me a little difficult to really hit the beats, and I don't think like the really classic happy ever afters always suit my books. But I think just in general, if like there's a lot of romance and it kind of ends well, I think like happy for now leaves a lot for the reader to later think about as well. Was that the question? I'm not sure.
Okay, no, that's good. Yeah, that's very good. Emma, over to you.
Well, I don't know if we should actually be bouncing this over to Brey, because as an editor, I'm sure she's found all the kind of like the little beats you must hit for it to be a romance, technically. But I think it's hard, because I think like with me writing fantasy, I think a lot of romance readers wouldn't accept it as romance if it's set, you know, there's dragons behind you, even if it's 90% romance and 10% dragons. I think a lot of romance readers will go, this isn't quite romance. So I think it kind of, you have to look at the book you're writing and see kind of what would work for that readership, for them to find that this is a pure, clean romance book. But then you can obviously like have the mashups of romantic fantasy and, you know, hopefully appeal a little bit to two genres.
I like that. Then yes, let's go to Brey then. Come on, let's hear from you.
And no pressure there. Thanks.
Lining it up well.
Yeah, you fix this. You deal with it.
I think Emma's nailed it there. I think there's an element of, if it's a pure romance, that's the whole focus. There is no other focus. So if there's dragons, or if there's gods, or if there's fairies, by nature that becomes not just a romance. And I think you do have to strike the balance. If you're going to put a romance in, it has to be worth it, and it has to hit those beats. But they have to weave in really nicely with the dragons and the fairies and the witches and all of that. So and that's where we end up with our mashups, as Arizona put it, where you get a fantasy romance instead.
I like that. And Claire, same to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I love a happy ever after, obviously, but I don't know. There was a part of me when I wrote the Witten series where I really didn't want to have one.
Right.
I was really against it. I was like, I was going to kill somebody off or have them as the killer. And I had to really kind of think about whether or not that was the right plan in the end, just because of who would be reading it rather than me writing it. And so I changed it up. I changed it up and I went with the happy ever after-ish kind of thing, because it's a serial as well. So the romance wasn't the main focus, but it was quite heavy in the first book, because you needed that kind of to work out who the character was and a little bit more about her as a detective. So yeah, so in the second book, it's not quite as much of a run on, but it's still part of who she is and what creates her as a character. But going forward, I don't know whether I would keep happy ever afters. I might change them on that.
Sometimes it's nice not to have a happily ever after. I mean, I know we've just been through a really dark moment in history, and however long this may continue. So you do want that kind of, you know, feel good stuff. But sometimes it's nice
you
to
can
have
write the
your soul
fluffy
torn
romances. Yeah, still write the fluffy romances, but every now and then it's
have
fun
a bit
to
different. I like that. On romance, we know romance sells really well. You know, that's number one. It sells really well. How do the other genres compare? And certainly within your experience, within your market, with your readership, how does each play out? Do you have a preferred genre? Do your readers, leading on from a question that's come through as well, do your readers are they loyal to one particular genre that you write? How do you find the balance? Let's start with Brey this time.
Oh,
you don't have to talk numbers specific or anything, just kind of as a general. Please don't feel
it's I think it doesn't sell as well. I mean, romance is the largest selling genre in the world. Nothing compares. Even your mystery and crime, which was kind of your next one down, is nowhere near romance. So as you go down the ladder, you know, I think when you're talking maybe even pure fantasy as opposed to urban fantasy, you're way down the list. And I think the fortunate thing about that with regard to readership is that people who like fantasy and that type of fantasy and sci-fi type stuff, I think they are really loyal. And I think that they're eager for new stuff to come out because there's not a ton of us writing it. So in that way, I think that they are actually very loyal.
That's really interesting. Yeah, to your point, it becomes a much smaller market, doesn't it? We're already within a small. Let's talk about mainstream in a minute and how could it translate across. Let's carry on with the same question. So over to Claire in your regard, in terms of the romance side of things versus, you know, writing alternative. How does that balance for you in terms of sales? And then your readership, do they tell you what you need to write?
Yeah, I found it was a real shock to me actually that there was such a difference, because I think I'd written 4 romances and my 4th one was really popular. I mean, it literally flew off the shelves and I was like, wow. And then, so, you know, I was so excited that I'd written this murder mystery and that was my next book out. And of course, no one bought it really. It was just like, oh, you know, what's happened there? So it was a big learning curve for me in the sense of that whole genre thing. And I wish I'd probably done it as a pen name, maybe as something different, because it did kind of, I think people were like, hang on, what is this? And so, yeah, it's massively different. It's picking up now. People are starting to read it a lot more now. And I kind of try and market it in a different way a little bit than I do the romance ones. But there is a massive difference, really huge.
And then you're weighing up, particularly if you're doing it for a living, if I understand, you're weighing up an earning versus actually doing what you want to do, right?
Yeah, because that's it. Because the people that have read it are like, they loved it. They're like, you know, I people on Books Office and that created the live reading. There's people that really love it. But at the same time, I'm like, it takes me 3-4 months to write it, and that's a long time to not earn any money from something. So it's a difficult one. Yeah.
Okay, same question to you, Arizona.
I actually would have to say that in terms of like pure contemporary romance and anything with like a paranormal element, I'd say that my stuff sells lots more than any contemporary I do, partially because I have more fantasy. But I think, like, as you mentioned, the mainstream part, I've just gone a little bit in it. I think it's a lot easier to sell a fantasy FF to a fantasy reader than to sell a romance FF to someone that's just a romance reader. And so for me, I've just been selling mostly fantasy and anything like that.
Love that. Well, we'll definitely come back to the mainstream one because I think that's a really good conversation. Over to you as well, Emma.
Yeah, I mean, I've mainly written romance and fantasy, and I kind of started out writing both. And like Claire, I realized that, you know, a little bit down the line that I needed to separate the two, which is why I've now got the romance under Emma Radley and the fantasy book under Emma Sterner-Radley. Because, yeah, people do get confused. But then again, I wrote a cozy mystery, which was a third part of a series of romance books, and people really liked that and really bought that. So I think I think some genres might be easier to mix in than others, which might be a bit of a bigger step, because yeah, fantasy is quite a big step for a lot of people. And like Ari says, you might be better trying to get fantasy readers from mainstream to come in and read those than trying to convert a lot of the romance readers. So,
well, let's carry on then. Let's stay with you then, Emma, in terms of the mainstream, because it strikes me that the content is what it's all about. It's that fantasy, it's that big, you know, you're going into a different world. You've created it from your imagination. You've got that creativity there. How do you get the balance between the two, or how do you market it either way? Is the book purely lesbic, which is obviously what we're talking about here mainly, or can it go across that way? How do you know? Is it something that you would explore?
Yes, I mean, I think that the dream is to try and get more people in. And I mean, I was coming at it from the opposite angle from Arizona, because I came from lesbic and writing romance mainly. So I kind of had that audience with me, and then kind of had to try and claw people from the outside in. But at the same time, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, what I write a lot of is YA fantasy. And a lot of YA fantasy, if it's FF, comes out from the mainstream publishers. So they're kind of used to picking it up, you know, in their local bookshop, you know, going in, actually picking up a hardback from a shelf. And obviously you can't do that with my books. So you kind of have to figure out how to promote to those people, which is very different from promoting to the lesbic audience, or so I've found at least. So you kind of have to figure out how to kind of go in both directions, so to speak, and appeal to more people.
Okay, Claire, same to you.
I don't know. I remember once hitting the top 100 in contemporary women fiction and thinking like, whoo, and then that's kind of it. That was it. It's like, yeah, and it's real strange, because actually I have a lot of straight people that read my books. So I know that there are people that they will read it. They just don't know it exists. But then half the lesbian world doesn't know we exist either. So I don't know.
That's a good point, actually, because I only stumbled across lesbic, I'm going to say 4 years ago. I don't want to tell you, I'm not sure exactly. But it's very true. It's about how do you get it out there in a bigger way for everybody to know. And, you know, I almost feel there is the mainstream angle. Brey as well, what's your experience in this regard?
Yeah, it's really difficult, because I work in kind of publishing in general as well with my partner, and the mainstream market is very hard. It's really, really difficult to break into for anybody, let alone people who are writing FF type stuff. It's a difficult market, and especially now it's glutted, and making your voice heard is virtually impossible.
Yeah.
And like Claire was saying about the number of people who don't know that lesbian stuff exists. We go to Manchester Pride and we do stalls, and we do Pride events in various places, and the number of people who come to us and say, we didn't even know this existed, is astounding. So it's always exciting too, to see new readers and to see people who come up and they get really excited, and that's amazing. But that crossover into mainstream, I don't know. I'm not sure how it works or how to make it work.
Because you'd like to see it more. For me, yeah, you need to understand that it's a lesbic part of it. It's women loving women, and because folk will want to go to that. But it should almost be, there shouldn't be a difference. You should be able to get anything anywhere, and you know, this kind of segregation almost, more inclusive generally, I think, in order for folk to you know, get.
I think another difficulty I find as well is with, like, I mean, a lot of us will sell our stuff on Amazon, and so when you create your book and they give you 2 options of categories to put your book in, so obviously I need to sell it, so it's going to go in lesbian fiction and lesbian romance. But actually you can email them and say, I'd like it to be put into this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and so on. I think it's up to 20 or something different categories you can put your book into. So maybe we all need to kind of just start flooding the mainstream market with putting our books in there, so that people find them. So, you know, I mean, I always chuck mine in the contemporary women's. I always chuck it into just any kind of women's fiction. And you just hope that somebody finds you eventually, you know.
Yeah.
I like the mental image of you just like chucking it. Like, and there.
Catch it. Literally, it's out there.
And another. And another.
Throw them this way. Brilliant. Yeah, there's questions on here saying, yeah, what needs to change? How do we change that? You know, what do we do to actually improve that or whatever? Perhaps we'll have another panel or another topic discussion on that very item. I think it's a very good point. I'll come back to another question that's just come through. In terms of pen names, I heard you just talk about that very briefly. Do you all write under pen names or you know, different, depending on what you're writing? Just quickly go through each of you, Claire.
Kind of. My name's got an additional name to it, but that's it.
Okay.
The Highton part's not really me.
Fine. Okay.
It was this stuff. I just wanted to. I always thought I was only ever going to publish one book, and I thought at least I'd have both my parents' names on it, and that was it. That was how I ended up with it.
I love it. And is that? Oh, so it's not to do with being in the lesfic world. It's just to do with right. Fine. Okay.
I just wanted my mum's name on there as well as my dad's. So that was all.
That's adorable. Arizona.
Yeah, just the one pen name. Like I tried in the beginning splitting up some of the things, but just didn't have the energy to keep that up, so I just chuck everything under the same one.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, Emma.
Yeah, just split them. Yeah, not too long ago, split them. So we'll see how that goes. If anyone finds my romance books now.
Oh, yes. Well, we'll make sure we put it all out there. For sure. I think after this event, we should list everybody out and make sure we've got really good promo for everybody. And you as well, Brey.
Yeah, I write under Brey Willows. My real name is Victoria Villasenor, and Villasenor isn't really like catchy. You know, it's not.
But
really
it's
easy
gorgeous. Where's that from?
It is gorgeous.
Yeah, I'm Mexican. So I separate basically my editing world and my professional world with my real name, and then my pen name is Brey Willows.
Love it. Right, we've got a. I also think we've maybe got somebody wants a review on here. I didn't know such a huge community exists until this year either. It's really interesting. It's fascinating. Folk just don't know. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on like Diva Community on Facebook, and the amount of times somebody comes on and goes, does anyone tell me a romance book or something I can read? And everyone's putting up all this mainstream stuff, and I'm just like, hello, we're all here. I did it yesterday. I linked all the, you know, and I was like, you know, I linked like 10 names. I was like, if you can't find one from there, come back, I'll give you some more. You know, it's like, it's crazy.
And we've got some love for your name as well, Brey, just to let you know. We've got some love coming in. Okay, fine. So, right, let's go on. Does writing, one of the questions that came through earlier, so I thought I'd ask, does writing in a particular genre limit how you want to do it? I think we've kind of explored this already. You can expand how you creatively write, but do you find writing in a particular genre limits what you're doing? Claire?
No. Not really.
Onward.
Whatever I choose, whatever I'm going to write, I'm going to write. So it's there, and I'm just going to do it. So
okay.
You know, but I find actually, it was weird. Actually, I find with the murder mystery, I literally wrote that from word one to the end in one draft, just bang, and I was just like, oh, that was easy then. Just like, because I thought it was going to be a lot harder, because when I do romance I'm constantly going backwards and forwards, but in that sense it was a different way of actually writing it. I just wrote it and then spent hours going over it going, this must be awful. Just editing, because I thought there's no way with one draft that's going to be any good. So yeah,
brilliant.
I don't worry about it, I just write them.
Anyone else, do you have a comment on that, or would you like to answer? No?
Well, I mean, I could say that writing fantasy is a bit different from writing like contemporary romance, because you do kind of have to figure out, you're writing and all of a sudden you go like, oh, hang on, do they have gas lamps here? And you have to kind of like figure out like, how does this world work? And if they have this, would they then have this? And could that just be done by magic to solve that? You have to figure out how it all is meant to work, which you obviously don't have to do in a contemporary story. So yeah, you have to kind of go back and figure out and make sure that things work together in a different way.
I'm having major malfunction, it appears. Apparently I keep freezing, so I apologise to everybody. Not only is it hot here, I'm freezing. That is weird in itself, is it not? Yes, I agree. Sorry, Karen, what were you going to say? Did someone just speak then?
I was just going to say, I think I agree with Emma in that it's there are things you have to work out, and your world has to be believable. Whatever world you build has to be believable, but particularly if you're in fantasy or sci-fi or anything like that, you have to think there are logic things. Like, if this is the world I built, then these creatures can exist, but maybe these can't. And you have to abide by the laws of the world you've built.
Yeah, I think that really does play a role, but I think partially when it comes to like certain tropes, there are big no-nos that you can't really do for any genre. Like, doesn't really matter what you're writing. If you're doing any, like, killing off your main character is often frowned upon, no matter what you're writing, Claire.
I'm going hard.
This is why I get in trouble, isn't it? 'Cause I don't care about these rules. I just write something.
But hey, you sell, so you're obviously doing something right. It's just the rest of us are going, oh God, don't
You can't do that. There's quite a lot of rules in lesfic, though, I've noticed.
Lots
in
of
Women Love and
rules.
Work, there's so many that you have to abide by. There's an awful lot.
Yeah.
And some of the books that don't conform to that are actually exceptional reads. Really great stories. But no, okay, that's brilliant. Great answers. Love that. So, okay, how do the other genres differ in terms of writing styles? And this is something that you mentioned, Emma, and I hadn't considered. Is there a different word count or so for, a preferred point of view when you're writing in the other genres, or does it not matter? Does that conform into those rules? And it came from you, Emma. What's your view on that?
Yes, it is different. I'd say writing fantasy, like, they obviously tend to be a lot longer. So a romance book is often around 60,000 characters, and a fantasy book can go up to like 150. So it's quite different. And I know that when I kind of go like, oh, I'm up to 120,000 words, I'm just like, struggling with it. And Amanda goes, that's my wife, Amanda, who writes romance, goes, but that's 2 books. Stop. Like, what are you doing? That's already 2 books. Just stop writing. It's just like, no, I'm not done. So yeah, it is quite different depending on what you write.
Okay, and the same experience for all of you, Brey?
Yeah, I think Emma's got it just right there. It's very much dependent on what you're writing, but the fantasy and sci-fi stuff tends to be longer just because you're doing so much more world building, and you have to kind of lay that out. So yeah, I agree. But as far as like point of view, I think you mentioned, I think it's very much dependent on the story and whose story it is. I have a tendency to use 2 points of view and go back and forth. But for Spinning Tales, which was a fairy tale, a lesbian fairy tale, that was done in just 1 all the way through. So I think it kind of depends on who you feel talking to you and whose voice is in your head when you're writing.
I love that, voices in heads. Claire, you're nodding away there. You agree?
I'm a rule breaker. So like I said, I didn't understand any of this. I just wrote stories. That was the end of it. And then I'd give it to my editor and she'd be like, you can't do that. And I'd be like, why? And she's like, because you can't. And I'm like, but I want to.
Gonna do it anyway.
And so I don't know. I've no idea how many words I'm supposed to write when I start writing. I just write it until the story's finished, and when it's finished, it's finished, and you get what you get, and that's it. I'm not going to add stuff to it just to make up the word count, and I'm not going to chop stuff out just to bring it down. So I just go with it.
I want to come back to that. Arizona, same, you're nodding.
Yeah, I think for me, the length of a book really does depend on how much you want to put in it. Just like Claire says, sometimes a story just ends and you're like, well, that's sooner than I expected. Cool. And sometimes it keeps going on, and then, well, I just have to write it. But I would also agree with that. I think it's easier to make longer series for fantasy than for contemporary for me. So the books in itself can just vary, but I think I have more longer fantasy series than contemporary because there's so much more happening, and it's, I guess, easier to add more things without it feeling like you're ruining the happy ever after. I guess.
Yeah,
We've got a lot of,
I have a thing. as well, Arizona, I completely agree. Like with romance, when you're writing a series, it's so easy to kind of find like, right, am I now throwing in like an argument just for argument's sake so there can be a second book? It's not as kind of seamless as it might be in a fantasy book where you have this like long arch of, you know, someone taking over the throne or whatever it is.
Yes,
so
and
yeah, that's
stuff keeps happening in fantasies that you can easily add in. Yeah.
I love that. You got a lot of love coming here for being a rebel and breaking rules. Gotta say, there's a lot of love coming through. A lot of love.
She's so cool. Claire is so cool.
On that, with your readers, I mean, obviously this is fantastic because folk are enjoying watching this, hearing, understanding, clearly love all of your work. Do you ever get feedback from readers that, why did you do that, or don't do that, or, you know, want you to go a particular way, or want you to write in one genre and one genre only? Or is it a lot more freedom? What's your general feedback? Let's start with you, Brey.
I'm not sure many people read my stuff, so
goes onto iPhone, downloads, and is going to start reading.
No, I don't get. I don't actually, honestly, get a whole lot of feedback. The trilogy that I wrote seems to have reached people in an interesting way. I've had, I think, 4 different people now show me tattoos that they've gotten.
Oh,
wow. Covers, which is pretty amazing. One of those was just a couple weeks ago, I think. And that's pretty amazing to know that you've reached somebody like that. But nobody's ever cared, I don't think.
Oh, I'm sure that's
just
not
doing
true.
it right.
I don't believe that's true for 1 minute.
Sound that way, but it's kind of, I don't know if my stuff's maybe just a bit fluffy, so people go, oh, that's nice, and off it goes, you know.
We've got love coming in from you right now. I mean, you'll be able to see this afterwards, but there's love for you right here. So yeah, everybody bring it through. Tell Brey what you think and send it through. What I've come to learn, and you can sorry, I'll come back to you and finish the question. Feedback's incredible, isn't it? Because it helps you understand what it is you're doing and how it's been, you know, how it's been received by people. And as we want to grow as individuals, you need to have that feedback in order to carry on and do it right. So I think you're amazing. Over to you, Emma. Sorry, on the same question.
What was the question again?
How do your readers, do they get upset with your feedback? And
I was just thinking that I've read Brey's books and they're amazing, so I just wanted to say that. But no, I did have a few people kind of, when I said like, right, I'm parking my romance books and I'm now writing only fantasy. I did have a few people who went like, that's great, I'm glad you're writing what you want, but I'll be saying goodbye here. And that's absolutely fine, because, you know, we all know what we like to read, and, you know, you shouldn't read something you don't want to. But I did have one person said, like, I just can't deal with all these kind of like big epic battles and like these old kingdoms, and you have to remember who everyone is. And I kind of said, look, my books don't tend to be like that. They don't tend to be the big epic things. They're usually like following a woman who usually falls in love with another woman. But it tends to be a little bit smaller. And she was like, okay, maybe I'll give it a go. So she's promised to read my next book. So hopefully I can get her on board. But yeah, sometimes people just kind of go like, this isn't for me. Then that's fine.
Yeah. Arizona?
I think when it comes to feedback, I think that's partially, I'd say, biased, because people that aren't interested in reading my books aren't going to pick them up and be able to give feedback at the end. And same with like beta readers and ARC readers. Obviously they're like volunteers or whatever, so if they don't want to read my books, they're not going to be reading my books. But I always do ask, like, what do you think? Give me honest opinions. And sometimes some of them do have preferences in what genre they like to read, but then they're just like, yeah, but you know what, the other stuff is fine. Or they just kind of ignore the request silently. And so, oh, sorry, I was super busy, but I'll read the next one. And I think everyone has favorite things, and I think that's perfectly fine. But nobody's telling me that you should write this one thing and you can't do this or you can't do that, because that's just, I mean, that's silly, because I'm already doing whatever I want. So
yeah, love it. Claire?
You'll be surprised to learn I get in trouble quite often.
You?
I find that really hard to believe, honestly. Shocks me to the core.
Well, I just think I like to keep them on their toes, because, you know, I think they get a bit too comfortable with fluffy romance sometimes. Sometimes you need to jazz it up a bit. And I did that with In Dire Need. It started off, the first book is basically a dystopian end of world. And everyone was like, oh, I'm not reading that. I'm not reading that. That's not my kind of book. And I was like, no, it's a romance. And they're like, no, it's end of world. And they didn't want to read it. And then the second one came out, and it completely kind of, I won't give it away, but it completely turns on its head, basically. And suddenly people were like, how did you do that? And then I got in trouble from people who did want to read a dystopian, who now didn't want to read what it had become. And then people were telling me off because I'd completely, you know, bamboozled them. And yeah, it was, you know, and I got the same for Witten as well, because there's a little bit right at the end of that one where possibly one of the main characters might die. And suddenly they were all like, no spoiler, the whole world had ended. Honestly, you'd think everything had imploded. So yeah, I do get in trouble all the time.
Well,
I get good feedback as well. I get nice ones. I got the nicest one I've had actually was with The Promise, which is quite a tearjerker. It is quite sad. It's about cancer. And somebody actually wrote to me afterwards to say that because they'd read the book, they went and got a check. And it was, they needed to have a check. They found to have something, and from that they are now okay. So from that was like a tiny little bit of feedback that I was just like, yeah, I can have that feedback all day long. That was
lovely.
nice. Yeah.
We've got folks then on here, they're all going to go and get your books now and read them if they haven't. All of you. No, all of you. Yeah.
Don't complain afterwards.
Not just Claire, all of you.
You've been warned.
Fair warning, Claire breaks rules.
Or if you complain, do it in a review.
I've lost all my train of thought. It's a total meltdown, literally, over here. I'm not going to lie. It's the last day. At least Amanda's closing out this whole thing. Thank heavens. I don't know. Look, good question. How do you research what you're doing? I suppose when you're going into fantasy, you've got the whole, you could do anything, can't you? How do you go about researching? Is there anything you need to put in to get world building? You know, do you base it on anything, or how do you go about finding or developing your stories? Let's start with Brey.
I love research. I am a down the rabbit hole kind of girl. Like, I love research. So for Spinning Tales, which is the one I mentioned with the cottage on top of the New York skyline, I very much looked at New York and tried to figure out where this was in relation to other places that she had to travel. I think believability is a thing for me, particularly when you're writing kind of urban contemporary fantasy that's based here or in a world you know. I think it's important to get the details right because it makes the reader feel like they're there. Science fiction, I mean, that was creating a whole world and determining which rules applied. Chosen, which was my dystopian, was very much research heavy because it's about climate change and end of the world type stuff and how long it would take on foot to get from here to there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's going to take a really long time. So they have to find a car that still works, you know, because that's just going to take too long. So a lot of research went into that and what the world is going to look like in 2100. Which incidentally is really depressing, so not one of the books I recommend.
Okay,
Kind of depressing right now.
Go on, Arizona.
I love world building, love it, and I love doing research, which is
lower, higher. Go on, I want to know what that is.
I would say like real research is like figuring out real logistic things, like how long would something actually take? Is this possible even in a fantasy world where you still rely on basic rules? And then there is research, which is me picking a fun show that is kind of related to what I'm gonna write and watching it, or reading a book that's related to it and watching it for inspiration, or buying myself things that my main characters would do and then doing it myself because I want to, but then I call it research. But I also love like figuring out things that are not related at all, but that just kind of make the world richer for myself, that aren't necessarily part of the story, but to kind of build build it in my head, because obviously there has to be so much more that makes it on the page. And I guess it's just kind of going along through the books. You kind of write a little, you hit a point where you go, hold on, here is something that needs to be different. Like, this is not just turn the light switch on. What am I doing here? And then you kind of research a bit more, and then you can move past that, and then you'll hit something new, or no, something else that needs figuring out. And I think that's just lots of fun. But
sounds magic.
Yeah, it is magic.
Literally. And Claire?
Well, I've got a couple of bodies buried in the garden. So
You know what? I wouldn't be so... No, actually, I'm not going to say that. But that is quite funny. That is quite funny.
No, I mean, for romance, it's kind of that's all quite simple enough to research. But with the murder mysteries, I really did need to kind of properly research, as Arizona says, proper. So I just contacted people that I knew. I've got several friends who are police officers, so I spoke to them. I contacted somebody from a pathologist from the Home Office and asked if I could have a quick chat with them about, you know, the kind of scientific stuff that I was going to have to write about. I'm not one of these writers that does, like, you know, with the fantasy worlds and your world building, you've got to put that detail in. I don't always have to do that. I can circumnavigate a lot of it, because I think most people, when they're reading a romance or even a murder mystery, they don't want so much information they've got to remember. It's just supposed to be like kind of nice, and let me just read this and escape from the world for a little bit. So I don't go nuts on it, or I don't over describe things. So yeah, but I do enjoy it. I do enjoy sort of talking to people that I wouldn't normally be talking to and getting their opinions on, could somebody murder somebody with this?
It's a fun one.
I was, yeah.
I am the person who, if they looked at my search history, they would be like, oh, she's a weirdo.
I was going to be, you're on the
totally.
police watch list.
Yeah, I might be. How to build a bomb. Claire's got that.
Yeah, probably on the same watch list as you then.
I love it. And Emma, finally to you.
Well, I think it depends on what I'm writing. If I'm writing romance books, then I mainly have to research occupations, because I find that, because, you know, you can draw from jobs you've had yourself for the main characters that have those jobs, but after a while, after a few romance books, you need something else. And then all of a sudden you have to figure out, like, okay, so if you are a barista, like, you know, it's not just pour coffee, then you're done. There's going to be like little details you do in your job. So that's kind of the main thing I would do with romance books. But with fantasy, I like to, as I said, I like to read historical novels, and I like to read non-fiction. So I read a lot of history books. So I often base my kind of world on a place and a time. So, you know, 1700s Stockholm is what I'm going to do in a couple of books. And then just kind of like take a bit of that and then just make it more fantasy and just add things on top of that. But that kind of gives me a core to start with. So that's what I tend to do.
Love it. I love it. This has been brilliant. Lots of folk are actually asking, so let's close it out. It might be a good segue to kind of end this in terms of what you've got coming up, what's in the pipeline, what's been released, what do you want to talk about, and folk are going to go out and buy it. So let's go around each of you. Brey, let's start with you.
Right now I'm working on, oddly enough, kind of a mainstream project, which is a retelling of a Greek myth, one of our very first female serial killers. Which I'm having lots of fun with, killing lots of people, which I'm not having to research, just so you know.
Not having to research.
But is that better or worse? Like,
yeah. So doing a lot of researching into mythology, which is where my heart is. And then I'm hoping to run a fairly big series also on the muses, and writing romances with each of the Greek muses.
Wonderful. That sounds awesome. Really, really fantastic. And when's that all coming out?
Never, probably. But everything's still in the pipeline at the moment.
Okay, fine. Very much work in progress. Okay, wonderful. Emma, over to you.
I've got a book called Whispering Wildwood, which is a fantasy, as you can hear by the name, which will be coming out. And I'm sitting here going, God, it's the 25th or the 28th? Soon. It's coming out soon.
Good stuff.
But
That's
yeah,
brilliant.
I'll be all over social media when it's coming out. So keep your eyes open for that.
Arizona?
I'm currently wrapping up a couple of fantasy series, so I'm writing last books for I think 3 series right at the moment. I'm wrapping up a Valkyrie Academy series and then another urban fantasy mystery kind of series, and then a contemporary one with serial killers as well. So also lots of killing.
I was going to say there's a theme here, folks. Yeah, there's definitely a
doesn't kill people all the time.
I just keep thinking
Just
of
a
The
little
Fall and Gillian Anderson. That's all I've got in my mind at the moment.
Awesome.
Over to you, Claire.
Well, I've literally just released my 13th book, so that was what, the 10th I think I released it on. So that's What Happened in Vegas. That's a romance. But I'm like Arizona. I'm always working on 3 or 4. So I've got my Christmas one that's been a Christmas novella, which is a friends to lovers romance. I have a Cam 4, my series. I'm halfway through that. And I also have a crossover where I'm going to try and bring the Witten series into more of a romance arc. So we will see how that crossover works.
Wonderful. Can't wait.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. And well, a couple of things to close out from me. First off, apologies for the technical difficulties, whatever that looks like on Facebook. I can only apologise. Thanks, whoever passed me a tissue. I think it did help. I did start to cool down, which is great. The sun's been beaming through. But thank you so much. These things happen when you do live things. It's sometimes it can be a car crash.
Thank you so much for moderating.
Oh, no, you're very welcome.
Yes,
well, no, I
thanks so
wanted to
much.
follow up, actually, in all seriousness. Claire's on the panel. Amanda was on yesterday with me, and Amanda's going to be next. I am incredibly grateful to have been invited to join you and do this whole event. It's magic that you took the time, you, Claire and Amanda, took the time to actually organise this, because I know it was quickly, put together. Plus also to, provide something that's free for everybody is absolutely wonderful. Great authors. I love speaking with you all. It's magic what you do in terms of the, penship, putting your heart and soul out there, particularly in the fantasy world. I think that it's brilliant. It allows us all to be creative. It allows us to escape, and it allows us to get out there and, just enjoy life and think differently, because there's a lot that's been going on over the past few months. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Is there anything you'd like to say before we close off and I hit end?
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for
So much.
watching.
Just keep buying the books and then we'll keep coming back.
Great note.